the Deputy Director of Protocol, Head Office, Communications Officers here. Then we are also being joined by the Deputy Director of Protocol, Head Office, Mr. Kwabena Frimpong. Also have the Deputy General Secretary of the New Patriotic Party in the person of Dr. Antoinette Tibu Dako. Then we have the Deputy IT Director, Stephen Forsen, also here with us, myself, George Krobia Santi, Deputy National Communication Director, and then my senior colleague, Dr. Asiedu Kukru, also Deputy National Communication Director, who double as the Dean of the Communication Directorate of the party. Without much ado, once again, you are welcome to the headquarters of the New Patriotic Party. Our Communication Director this afternoon will be engaging you on some critical and pressing national issues. At this juncture, I humbly invite to the podium Dr. Richard Anyaba to take over. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the headquarters of the New Patriotic Party. We called you today to address some troubling matters to do with the actions and inactions of the John Dramani Mahama administration that threatens the democratic rights and contribute to the grave worsening of the fight against galamsey in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2024 general election was a pivotal election because a lot was at stake. There was the need to sustain the economic recovery that began in 2023, to eliminate the worsening or the state of galamsey in our country, to improve infrastructure and create more jobs for our young people. It was a difficult fight that Ghanaians faced, and while we, the New Patriotic Party, was hopeful to win that election, given the programs and policies in our manifestos, we lost the election to the National Democratic Congress, led by John Dramani Mahama, who at the time we warned that did not have a clear-cut plan to tackle the challenges confronting us. 3 months into the presidency of His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, Ghana faces a regressive resetting agenda that we must all stand together to fight in the interest of protecting our environment and the rights of our people in this country. In essence, to save our democracy against the grave incursions on the rights of our citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have observed so far from the NDC government is a regression in civil rights and human rights of citizens, and the efforts to fight illegal mining worsening as the NDC members, emboldened by the subtle promises of the campaign, that's the NDC campaign, emboldened and are now going out and raping our forest cover with impunity. Ladies and gentlemen, holding people accountable, that is, former government appointees and officials accountable, is an ingrained value, is an ingrained system, or is an ingrained value of the New Patriotic Party. We believe in holding public servants or people who have been appointed to take public office accountable. That commitment led us to the establishment of the Special Prosecutor's Office and increased funding for the Auditor General whilst we're in office to increase their efficiency and effectiveness. In other words, we believe in accountability. Therefore, we are not averse to the fight or genuine efforts aimed at holding people accountable, and including members of our government, accountable for their service. However, we are concerned about the evident violation of citizens' democratic rights and the clear strategy of the John Dramani Mahama administration to try individuals accused of potential acts of corruption in the media rather than in the courtrooms. This is not prosecution, it is persecution. Ladies and gentlemen, the government is not interested. The John Dramani Mahama government is not interested in prosecuting corruption, but one of its landmark decisions since coming into office was by the Attorney General issuing nolle prosequi to clear all NDC members standing trial. And I'm sure all of you are aware of this. They cleared every single member of the John Dramani Mahama former administration, cleared them of all wrongdoings, and they walked free. This is no evidence. This shows clearly that the government is not committed to fighting corruption. That was the first action they have taken, and this was designed and actually directed by the president himself with a clear plan to clear the path for them to target the New Patriotic Party, their political opponents. Article 19 of the 1992 Constitution guarantees the right to fair trial, including the presumption of innocence until proven guilty by a court of competent jurisdiction. The Attorney General and Minister for Justice, Dr. Dominic Ayine, an accomplished lawyer, is aware of this provision but have chosen to disregard it and instead engage in a media trial, presenting untested evidence to create an impression of guilt in the minds of the public about people his government accused of having engaged in acts of corruption. This is an irregular act. This is not how the fight against corruption has been carried on as far as this Fourth Republic is concerned. Many of you are aware that the Akufo-Addo Bawumia administration prosecuted some of the NDC people and jailed them. But those actions leading to their persecution and holding them accountable was not a media activity. Some of those persecutions, people criticize us and as though that we were not doing anything. It was only because those actions that needed to be taken to hold people accountable was taking place in the courtroom rather than in the media. And we expect this government to do so, and we are willing to support them in every way possible to undertake the prosecution of corruption according to law in the courtrooms, not in the media. But what we have seen so far from them is a deliberate act of inciting the public and trying to incite public sentiment against the New Patriotic Party by creating these media events to talk about people's guilt, to talk about evidence, rather than taking those evidence to court. And this is one of the key things we think that we need to bring to your attention, because it is a deliberate act that a government is undertaking because it feels that perhaps it didn't have enough evidence, or the evidence it has against these individuals that it claims have conducted acts of corruption, that either the evidence they know cannot stand the test of scrutiny in the courtroom, or they simply are engaged in a political persecution to vilify individuals and create disaffection for the New Patriotic Party. And so the question we ask, ladies and gentlemen, is why the Attorney General is not going to court, but rather going to the media. Why is that? Ladies and gentlemen, the answer to these questions are one of two possibilities. It is either the Attorney General lacks confidence in the supposed evidence he has to withstand the rigor of trial in the courtroom, or that the media trial is part of the government's grand agenda to defame its political opponent, being the New Patriotic Party. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that it is the latter. That it is the latter, perhaps both, that the National Democratic Congress, the John Dramani Mahama administration is engaged in a plot, one, to defame the New Patriotic Party because he knows that the evidence he has cannot stand the test of any scrutiny in the courtroom, and so it results to a media campaign to create disaffection for the New Patriotic Party. And we believe that that is evidence of his lack of commitment to the fight to reduce corruption in his government and also to hold former government appointees accountable. As I indicated earlier, the government is not interested in combating corruption, but in persecuting and sowing seeds of disaffection against the New Patriotic Party. This is why the government has positioned persons like Richard Jakpa and others in key positions within the national security apparatus to use all means necessary to intimidate, to harass, and humiliate Ghanaians with impunity. Ladies and gentlemen, that would not wash. That attempt would not wash. Because Ghanaians will judge this government based on its performance and not how well it has defamed its political competitor, and in the process undermine the rights and liberties of Ghanaians. The performance of this government so far has been disappointing, given the 2025 budget and the significant deterioration in the fight against illegal mining, galamsey. Let's talk briefly about the 2025 budget. The 2025 budget is disappointing, and I'm sure all of you will agree, despite the generous contributions they enjoyed from the National Economic Dialogue. President Mahama campaigned to establish a 24-hour economy. And all of you are aware, we stood here many times to tell you that was a scam, but somehow it fell through the cracks and then we voted for them. Today, with the evidence from the 2025 budget, you will agree with me that it's indeed a scam in the making. The budget, as you will agree, made no provisions for the implementation of the 24-hour economy. The only comment we hear about it is that sometime along the line, the finance minister will bring a policy proposal to Parliament for consideration about the 24-hour economy. There is no allocation in the budget for it. The government's priorities in the 2025 budget clashed with the expectations of Ghanaians, which is evident in the funding allocations for the programs in the budget designed to impact lives. It is unusual for a government that has won election on the promise of jobs and economic growth to allocate significantly lesser resources to support development in the real sector of the economy. The government has earmarked a whopping $2.711 billion for compensation at the Jubilee House, exceeding the allocations made combined for the following programs, shall I say, flagship programs for the government. One, the Agriculture for Economic Transformation. A total of $1.5 billion was allocated for that program. The National Apprenticeship Program, a total of $300 million allocated. The National Coders Corps, this is supposed to take care of some 1 million Ghanaians. A total of $100 million was allocated. You've heard about the Jumera program. A total of $100 million is what they allocated. And a few women amongst us this afternoon. The Women's Development Bank, a measly $51 million is what they allocated. All this put together is less than what the president allocated for his office. for the compensation. I'm not talking about anything else. There are many things that they have allocated for the Office of Government Machinery. But this is just for compensation of a handful of people at the Jubilee House. 2.7 billion. More than what they have allocated combined for these flagship programs that is going to do. So from here, you can see that the government's priority is not the good people of our country, whose votes they have obtained on the back coming to create a certain Ghana with a certain program of resetting to a better place. But then now we see clearly that they are resetting us backwards, and we all have to try and fight to resist that. It is not done yet. I have seen some efforts across the society, women especially, who are intent on fighting back to see that these promises, especially the promise on the Women's Development Bank, is realized. But I can tell you that with this allocation, there's very little that you can hope for. So ladies and gentlemen, how can this be, as I indicated earlier, with this allocation and the promise they made to us, than the allocation made to impact the lives of millions of young people and Ghanaians at large? Many have criticized this misplaced priority in the 2025 budget. The Chief Executive of Agri-Impact, Mr. Daniel Fahine Akwe, a significant stakeholder whose view from his criticism suggests to me that he was not consulted, his views were not sought, even though the government is going on a spree, creating the impression that they are a very consulting government. But a stakeholder such as this has not been consulted. And he has come out to criticize the allocation for the agricultural sector as insufficient. Others, including the AGI, have also criticized this budget. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that the budget is at variance with the expectation of the people of Ghana. The Women's Bank, as I said, also suffer another faith where the entire allocation for it is less than what has been allocated to the Lone Ranger Office, the Office of Government Communication, that sees a whopping 78 million Ghana cedis compared to the 51 million allocated for the creation of the Women's Bank to affect the lives of millions of women in our country. One potentially positive aspect of the 2025 budget, I must say, is the elimination or the removal of the 10% betting tax and the e-levy. By the way, something that we had scheduled to repeal if we had won the election. So if we take that out, the balance of the 2025 budget has very little to offer in terms of the expectations of our people. I tell you that dissatisfaction with the 2025 budget is widespread. And so it's not a thing that you will say that it's a new patriotic party that is opposed to it or is not happy with it, but it is widespread. And as I've indicated, in the days ahead, we'll be engaging in conversations to do with the budget, and we are sure that Ghanaians will get to understand that indeed we have made the wrong choice in selecting the NDC and not the NPP. But for now, let me turn my attention briefly to the fight against galamsey. The fight against galamsey has significantly deteriorated. Just before the election, you heard calls in civil society, championed also by the National Democratic Congress. The president now, I've been seeing on platforms saying that Ghanaians voted for us, and so therefore we must resolve the problem of galamsey. Some have called around that time for a state of emergency to be declared. The NDC participated in that conversation and created the impression that we're not willing to do much about the fight to curb galamsey. But today, you will agree, as I tell you, that this government lacked the commitment to fight galamsey. And what exacerbation we're seeing in galamsey around the country is as a result of the lack of commitment of the John Dramani Mahama administration. Today, our forests are populated with recruited militants from Ivory Coast and other regions to protect galamseyers who, according to media reports, are NDC members. Currently, mining has devastated 44 out of the 288 forest reserves in our country. At this rate, we risk losing all our forest cover to galamsey. A situation, when you ponder, should cause a shiver in your spine, because you have seen recently operatives and party members of the NDC actively preventing task force or security forces detailed to fight corruption and protect our forest cover. The NDC, ladies and gentlemen, is complicit in the astronomical growth in illegal mining in our country, because they campaigned actively in galamsey areas with coded promise, which translate to mean that we will allow the boys to galamsey simply by looking aside and pretending to be doing something about fighting galamsey. So in other words, the NDC is talking more about galamsey, is talking more about the fight to curb galamsey than actually doing anything to fight it. With the NDC government in power now, these members and supporters whose votes they canvassed, and as events have turned out that they have obtained, have come back to take their pound of flesh. That's why you see the devastation around. That's why you have seen a renewed vigor amongst the galamseyers out there with militants to protect them. And the government cannot do anything about it besides talk. You heard recently they commissioned some blue water guards, which blue water guards are not primary fighters. They are complementary to the fight, but then they are presenting them as their key proposition to fight galamsey. And the individuals you see do not exude that confidence or have the stature or the readiness to be able to combat or engage any galamseyer or galamseyers who are wielding guns and machetes with the people we saw in the video who they have trained to be the blue water guards. And as I indicated recently, this blue water guard situation is not new. We have the river wardens trained and deployed somewhere in 2022, 2023. And so it's not a new thing they are doing. It is not the panacea to resolving the galamsey situation. It's complementary, and the NDC is merely just talking about it. The real work they must do today is to be able to get security people to go out there and tell their party people to stand down. And all the people they have promised that they will allow to galamsey to stand down so that our rivers and our forest can be saved from the ravages of their acts. As we speak, ladies and gentlemen, the Ofin Shelter Belt Forest Reserve is infested with galamseyers who recently attacked and injured Forestry Commission Rapid Response Team members. In the Brim North District, several forests have been overtaken, namely the Chenchemso and the Jari Forest in Equiansi. This was just days ago, about 2 days ago. We've had these activities recorded. Additionally, the Tano Enua Forest in Awin, the Asenyano Forest River, and the Jimra Forest Reserve in Nkawia District have also been taken over by galamseyers. Ladies and gentlemen, the lists of our forests that are being raped by these NDC galamseyers who have been emboldened by the president's overtures in the campaign is just astonishing. And this is an unprecedented situation. The government must use every necessary resource to regain control of the situation. One of the key, ladies and gentlemen, one of the key actions in this direction is the revocation of LI 2462. The president promised he would do this in the campaign. We want to remind him that he must do that. In making this comment, let me quickly commend the Media Coalition Against Galamsey led by Dr. Ken Ashigbe, our brother Erastus Asaridonko, and other civil society organizations that are engaged in ensuring that the fight against galamsey is brought under control since this government took over and it has taken a turn for the worse. President John Dramani Mahama, using the galamsey fight in the 2024 campaign, stated he will repeal LI 2462 to end mining in our forest reserves. However, as president, he has gone back on his promise to revoke the legislative instrument and instead has offered to amend parts of the law which takes away the president's power to approve applications for mining in forest reserves. So this is a tokenist approach which does not end mining in our forest reserve, and given the rate at which the NDC operatives are taking over our forest, under John Dramani Mahama, we are likely to lose the vast majority, if not all, of our forest cover. Ladies and gentlemen, amending the instrument will not suffice, considering, as I just said, the rate at which the forest covers or forest reserves are being attacked with armed protection from outside this country. A complete repeal of the law is necessary and is what we must demand to ensure a total ban on mining in our forests. We recall the state of the galamsey fight under President John Dramani Mahama before he exited office in 2017. It was a total give-up. His Minister for Lands and Natural Resources gave up on the fight. This time is very early on. It seems to me as if he just is continuing from where he left off. It appears today in our country that the fight against galamsey has been given up on. The president is not focused on fighting galamsey. What we experienced in 2016, or before the president left office, is coming back, as we all can tell. Members of the NDC are visibly emboldened to engage in illegal mining because they realize that the president and their party will be lenient on galamsey because of the promises they made to galamseyers in the campaign. So we faced a choice, especially in protecting our environment. That is, the president is not interested in fighting corruption, but rather is engaged in persecuting his political opponents. Our environment is being sacrificed, and our democratic rights are under attack. This is what we voted for. But this is one thing that we must all come together and fight. People say elections have consequences. The consequence of our choice on December 7th is facing us. Already, I get a lot of calls from young people who have been retrenched from employments they have attained legally and legitimately. Just yesterday, an announcement was made as though it was a pride point to say that some 100 people have been let go from the Ghana Post. This is what we voted for. But I know that this is not what Ghanaians were expecting when they made this choice. As it stands, we must fight, at least one, to ensure that our rights, at barest minimum, our democratic rights, are not completely taken away from us. The rate at which the Attorney General is going, we fear that might happen unless we speak up. So for me and for us, this is not a partisan call. This is a call to protect this Fourth Republic, that all actions of the government must comport with the law, must be in accord with the law. And also the fight to protect and save our environment must be spirited, and the government must commit itself to ensuring that we preserve our environment. As citizens, we cannot sit and feel helpless. We must engage. We cannot be indifferent. Therefore, we urge all Ghanaians to join us in this fight to protect our environment, our water bodies, and our democratic rights for ourselves and for our posterity. Thank you very much for coming. So, Milanum Yadamunina, she said, and they are from one mobile. Now, somewhat, Yade Banina, a sem inform ye nupe. And he said, Yetwa bay 2024 Yakotwa Bano. Now NPP, when that so say, Kebe winning. The son said, she say, yeah. Say yade ahotoso beba na policies are yade ato akwanu ama say economy no a start say ejina na now so efi COVID-19 ene Russia Ukraine say ye mo no na ye need that say nka Ghana for my akwanya no a ka betumi ama ahotoso a yenya ye efi 2017 2018 19 mu nyina no betumi asan de Ghana konda da mu bio but Amanesa, ama Ghana for to Abama NDC. Aya, ya papa John Dramani Mahama Odano. Na if he's abre ya, o wini ye. Omuni ye bia, no, albo ye, or Ghana, and as a mufiti so mo ye besi neno. Actually, say, omo eni, in fact, before Kramako Hono, I say, ye campaign that ye di catch the Ghana for say. President John Dramani Mahama Yehunida. Aba be yebi ama na dwuma ya nso eni magana for pamon ade nti e pamon no abra akosi se yeto ababa no December 7 wan kire ya de foforo bi a oba beye apart from the oye ya yampa okoye no wan ka de foforo bi a nti ne yanim se oni plan bi a o de besese bibia e wo Ghana ate ye kan no Ghana fo ante ana se omanji yansemantum na omokoto ma NDC enti every say oba yi ode nano na efifa Ghana ho se bia baba bia na ode nano na ode info no twa picture na omoye optics public relations na omo dey governance omoye efi abra omoba yi be ye sure say we betumi de start we bi so say we no ma sha say omoye ana say we no ma ka say ombe ya onya gidi omo say omoye abeboa enti nyoma bielu e de ye pese e de tumonim na esa nse omo ni hweye ni nti no ma fa adwene o kai say campaign mo no mo say corruption nti ma fa adwene say oh corruption ni de e de be politics esa nse omo ba yi o ma hwe nkrata ni mu a ekote ora nyina sa ora yi yaka say mo ni nyina so e kire mo beji tu mo so mo ni nyina so no ehwehwemu amoye nyina am de akoma Attorney General sorry na obey press conference. Attorney General sorry now obey press conference. China obey press conference. Attorney General so no enye press conference ni media no oye. Court na se woko. Na almost say abaidada mufuo no edi bone aye kata hyehyɛ ene proye bebere a omaka na enumu no na almost more evidence but evidence no omuntumi fa nko court de bia betena media na ye say nipa din boni se waye say ni nyina no ye hu akiri na de akire ne se omafa adwene se court ne de omonko asa bia omako court ne kura omunim se evidence a omo ko ode court no ene nyina so se omko court a omedi bim na say allegations o maya fa nipa no ho no court befo aso say ampara nipa ne di sa abone no enti before kura mbako court akoko di sa nkoguo no omba media for si abeka cho so si besi we eska we dwane kura kote ewo a friend say Senegal ehwe na ye hu no afa plane akopie London na wasa sheda se oko Dubai eno wasa ne chi akọ London eno wa be pie Ghana ananse sem nko a nanse sem nko a e kire se omo se nipa ni din omo kan to Ghana for trimu se nipa ne di bone kura anse de akọkọt but Ghana ha ne wo mra sa mra ne kire se nipa bia se nyina ate ase obi ababo ko edu se sia so osibesi wa fama de mra ne kire se sa nipa no se wodi kan akasa no nkire se ampara wodi sa bone no se okode enyiraso ekokot ko kire se ampa the America no mehu no picture nie letter nie bank account nie we say na kire pa asasa na yakom ahwe se ampara ya oka ne no kure ta proof no very important yehunu bebere se nipa etwa asamato nipa se be court no court be hwemu brakwan so no na nipa ne nifo no wasan na wanya na ne fa hudie enti emra no ahyehye se ma obia nye saa se wetwa asamato obi so na se nipa no ye da asam na to no so ara o se obi twa asam to so anase aban ne po twa asam to so na o kasa no a ese ye susu se unye saa bone no enkosi abra court be ka se ampara ya hwemu evidence kire se ampara waye ade no ansa yetumi aka se we di saa bone no na Attorney General oye mranim ni a onim se saa ade we e wo ye constitution ni aya article 19 a provide say men susu obia say we di bone until say court be ka se we di bone adesa anse onim say ni nsemu a wo twato nipa so no enye dokore adasa oni nyina so saa odi kan e count to manfo team ama manfo akaso em before there ama bokro no osimesi there wa bokro no ansa ya hwenkratem enti we ya oye se ko na court ko kaso asema o ka nya nokore nipa yi wonye saa no a na Ghana fo adwuma yo munya ebia NPP fo ne court fo akoye kanana na court fo de ja nipa no enti agenda is for asset instead say Attorney General be court no court na de bia ne kasa de bia ne press conference enti e kama mohu na mohu ekire say de omo ye nie say enye prosecution bi na on pese omo ye e persecution e your time e huna na NDC for ede ye se be ya Ghana for ebenya NPP hu time so wo mo ba ye ma ba ye dwuma bia ma wi esika nya no kure na de ye ka ama ye nyina hu na Attorney General atibie ni se NPP ebegina ho ama emra se emra ba ye dwuma na ye de ye ntia se obi edi bone ewo ye mu na ye de me famra kwan so ye mfa nipa no famra kwan so se de amra kire but me mfa nipa no embeto press conference emma engu ne hu fi emma nipa nsusu se nipa no ya de bone ye ni abra ye hu ne mramu se ampara odi sa bone no ta futuo no na ye pese Attorney General otie na odi ye adwuma na eboye se be ya amanfo fa hu di a constitution na guarantee no on fa endwetwe form na asem de ka ho a ye pese ye ka ya hunhia pa ne se ye galamsey ho nsem ye sase ye nsuo ene ye forest ho nsem a ene NDC fi se omoba abamu 27 January 7 2025 no ihyehyeye ya ye a ye ko enimu na pese ye di sa galamsey so no atete apansa NDC for and share anye sa adwuma no esa say during campaign mu nomine nam galamsey areas kire mo so mo de monto maye na ye ba be ma mo kwan ma mo ye adwuma sa audio yi de video mo hu a from 2020 no mo start ekeka ansem we and the 2024 no mo to aso ne amanfo e bush ekeka ansem we enti waka ansem we a kire dipa na wo kro ya ba we ni election a wo hwese nipa ne be jai galamsey no ana enti enne no galamsey atiate say omo a eye galamsey ananka first omo suro say aban nipa ba bechi omo ana security for bechi omo no say si are omo nya kokudro because o madamfo aba o yonko amo na hwibom aba na omo wo bush ekeka so ye beto ama mo beba ne de aka no omo nya aba omo nya aba ne de obia abeje ne chefa joni a ye galamsey oni ana enye ye NDC for a mo hwe so mbeye no enne no madamfo John Dramani Mahama ne NDC ku amaba no o manya kokuduro ane o matiesi mu the forest ni nyina kwaye ni mu nyina o magye afa na mu stories de mo media for munim na ebe bo nipa ba ku mienu abaso ene agiremu a o magye se saa adwuma we a o munim galamsey adwuma o munim se ebe sei yensuo ne asase ebe sei edaachen ema ye ma eba mo nso so de a ye nana mo gya ya yenso ye hwe so no ya hwesu ye nti omo ba omo nya bi ekura mfa mbobra no ye nua Dr. Kenashigbe ene ye nua Erastus asare donko ene civil society organizations a omo di mu akotene se sa galamsey ebe bra no ase ye damase na ye gina omodwuma no so aka kira ban ne se o mu se wa hye boss obe ma o ma ye galamsey but and then yesre no onhwe na omunkuntia galamsey the forest ni nyina bebriama bodin wa say okọ bebi biara na galamsey for na either say o mako wremu awie ana say mo fa plans o mako wremu and then the abandon say o ma import security for militants from Ivory Coast I am rebi atwemu na o ko o krom na say ne abrase no o mu ni adwuma bia ya in terms of say o ma akosa akon no mako fa o omunim protection and security mo adwuma omo otuom proprietuo e forest omo bo galamsey for ho ban se omo ntu galamsey enti ene security for kra e ko ye forest omo suro omo go pio omo so aye ni omo adisi ani na ebi ye bo bi tuo na ebi nso so ye twa bi ye disi kan twetwa bi no mo na we aya dia eye ne bresem apart from say essay your forest ne ensase ene yensuo no eye national security threat say enkware mu a na say your forest e wo ho no omo ahyemu ho no kuretuo a omo de terrorize national security for na say police for ne soldier for omo ko so omo bo your forest ho ban te ba ne say omo awon den kobro security for de no so a na kire say your forest no o be say ne duro be enti enne yensuo a say ye koso nyina ne forest a ye take you over ne nyina no e free NDC ye papa John Dramani Mahama ne mre yo a oye ewo sa galamsey nsam ehu na dia yesere ne say onye ne say oma ne ni nkọ ho na one ne party for enkasa say galamsey no eye omunjai no omunjai na in addition so no o shebo say mre bi wo ho a efre no LI 2462 a ye pass ya makwan say otumi eye mine wo e forest mu no o shebo campaign mu say beyi samra ne free ho na samra no etumi yi free ho a ebeboa ama ya bande mining our forest bia mu Ghana ha at least say ebe maye space kakra na etumi a control say ye na e koso no tie sre say sa amra no o ka say obeyi free ho no onyi free ho e na me no ka say emra no e da ho a ye county from in 21 days no je na me no ka say e di be some 1 week bi a eko until no time sa emra no e mature na ye implement ya mining in forest no e be koso a enyai the ever kakra ni say president no onye nipa we approve but the approval process no e be koso ara a kire say nipa be koso amine ye forest no enti galamsey no e be worse samra no say enye mfiri ho a enti yesre say boshe na ye papa John Dramani Mahama share no o medi so na emra na wakwa amende a e twen say in the next 21 days e be mature na omode aye adwuma onko no onko yi mra nyina every ho se be ya mining in our forest no e be jai te be jai kura because onu bai ne nkrofo a o ma tegu forest ni mo no se e jai ne yanyi sa mra we every ho na ye se onu no oba approve no kwa na yi free ho a process na o be famu akwakoye mining no forest no e no da hostel ena ne nkrofo se o ma wi ata so se o mbeye galamsey no o me fa kwan bia so samra no ho a fa kwan bia so no makwakoye sa galamsey no nti pam no twam no ye nyi emra ni free ho na embeye se mining wo forest Ghana ha nyina no ye de ensa to so a obia entumi enkonkoye ye hu obi wo hwa na ehu se sa nipa no bu mra so ontumi nka se o me won krata we na me de ye sa ye hu se ho no de ye no go area se ya anya ne sa enche bia no ye forest a ye wo Ghana ha nyina no be da ne galamsey bia na ye besre se media for mo so mo de ma no be ka ho anoma batum na ya make sure say ya papa beti sa message na ya koso aka Ghana tumi a amba John Dramani Mahama ne NDC for no enye tumi a ya ton anya nye tumi a ya omodia e tumi a wo yen Ghana for enti ya ma omo se ombe yusu sa tumi no se be nyina ye nkogina parliament ye nyina nkogina Jubilee House se me na meka se oba kofo nkoye ene ye de papa Dramani Mahama akosi ho parliament nso ya se bia akosi ho so monye sa decision ye maye nyina eno nkire se ya ne de omo pe na so omo ye so omo ye de a ye soma omo so omo nkoye na de omo ye soma omo so omo nkoye no so omo nya ye hu kwan se ye be ka kire omo se omo hwe na omo nya de omo ya emmoa Ghana no enti asem we e asem ma se ye ka kire NDC for se de omo ye no ye mfo aso de omo ya ene omo de galamsey aye party eduma omo chechema omo chairmans ne omo party for no ye ninje ho ye forest a omo awremu a omo se no ye ninje ho nti omo njai na saa tumi no ye wo se ye beka ba se yanka ye be gina ho ama NDC for asay ye nsuo no ma say ye forest nti ye besre say ye message mon make sure say mo be mana ko ekiri e maka ama obi ate say be ya nyina ye di eni be ko ho na ya support say the fight against galamsey no Ghana ye be di so nkunim ama ya protect the environment ene ye nsuo damas yeah, sure say we the question be any hosa. Okay, that means
so already you are spending enough time here.